Again, welcome. Before we get into the meeting format and logistics, please know that we have Spanish interpreters at this meeting. I will ask them to introduce themselves and they will provide instructions on how to join their room to hear the translated version of the presentation and discussion. Carlos? Carlos, you are muted.
Tomen en cuenta que en esta reunión estamos usando intérpretes. Vamos a enseñarles a ustedes que quieren escuchar esta reunión del I-95 Stanford PEL Study en cómo llegar a el canal en español.
Thank you. Yes. I'm going to provide an overview of the format for our meeting this afternoon. This meeting is being recorded. If you do not wish to be part of a recorded meeting, please go ahead and disconnect. The recording and transcript will be posted on the project website. 7 members of the public are participating in the meeting today. I'm going to suggest a few tips on how to best participate in this virtual meeting. I know many of you are familiar with Zoom, but I'll briefly review a few tips to help you navigate the meeting today. This is a Zoom webinar as opposed to a Zoom meeting. It is slightly different than some more informal Zoom meetings that you may have participated in. To preserve bandwidth and have a smoother virtual meeting experience, you may want to close other programs that are running on your computer. If you have any issues with Zoom during the meeting, we have a technical support person available to assist you. You can reach this person, Sarah Grossman, by email at sgrossman@fhistudio.com. You can also use the Q&A feature if you need technical help with Zoom. If you are disconnected at any point during this meeting or are having bandwidth issues, there is an option to telephone into the meeting. You can use the toll-free number on your screen to access the meeting. If you are disconnected or joining via phone is simply a better option. That number is 646-931-3860. If you telephone in, you will need to enter the meeting ID, which is 889-2156-1918, and the passcode is 729231. Lastly, Zoom is generating closed captions for this meeting that should be showing up at the bottom of your screen. If you are seeing them and want to turn them off, or if you are not seeing them and want to turn them on, you can do so by clicking the button in your Zoom toolbar that says CC. After my short discussion of housekeeping items, I will turn it over to the team to provide a presentation on the I-95 Stamford PEL study. After that, we will turn to the discussion session when members of the public will have the opportunity to share their comments. Today, all participants are placed on mute until the discussion period, which will follow the 30-minute presentation. During the discussion period, there are 2 ways you can provide feedback or ask a question. The first is through raising your hand to speak aloud to the study team and all participants. We will also accept and respond to your written questions during the discussion period. We will alternate attendee participation between the raised hand option and the Q&A written method. Our goal is to get feedback from everyone tonight. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. After the presentation, at the beginning of the discussion period, I'll invite anyone here today to share a comment. You can indicate that you would like to share a comment by raising your hand. Excuse me. All right. You will be identified with a yellow hand towards the top of the participant list. This means that you are requesting to speak. If you are not seeing the raise hand in your Zoom toolbar, you may need to click on participants in your Zoom toolbar and the button will show up in the bottom of the window of the participation pane. Please turn this function on so you can see when your turn is coming up. If you're calling in by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand and we'll be able to call on you. When it's your turn to speak, I will call out your name. Our technical host will then request that you unmute yourself. Please click unmute before you begin speaking. When we unmute you, please state your name slowly and spell your first and last name for us. If applicable, please indicate any organization that you are affiliated with. Please be mindful of time so that everyone can have an opportunity to speak. I'll ask you to wrap things up at the 5-minute mark. Please note, if your comments are lengthy, you can also submit them in writing. We'll identify ways that you can do that later in the presentation. All comments tonight will be taken into consideration by the Connecticut Department of Transportation. The comments you make tonight will be recorded and summarized in a meeting summary. We will also be taking your written questions throughout the meeting. Staff will provide answers to your submitted questions during the discussion period. Please submit questions via the Q&A button in Zoom. Representatives of the media can direct their inquiries to the Connecticut Department of Transportation Office of Communications. The email is ctdotmedia@ct.gov. No person on the basis of race, color, or national origin shall be excluded from participation or subject to discrimination on the development of this project. The Connecticut Department of Transportation has more information in a civil rights flyer at https://bit.ly/civil-rights. The Connecticut Department of Transportation is also asking members of the public to visit and complete their demographic survey at https://bit.ly/ctdot-feedback. We are adding these links to the chat feature in Zoom. With that, I'll turn it over to John.
Thanks, Marcy, and welcome everybody once again to our meeting this evening. My name is John Dean. I am the project manager from Connecticut DOT. The study team from Connecticut DOT is comprised of Mike Calabrese, who is the division chief of highway design. Neil Patel is the principal engineer of the major highways unit. Again, I'm the project manager, and Joe Belrose is the project engineer. You'll be hearing from myself this evening, as well as Emily Valentino, who's the project manager from the prime consultant Stantec that's leading the study. Andrew Lassard is the bridge engineer. Najma Jami is the traffic engineer. And Marcy Miller, whom you've just met, is our community engagement lead from FHI Studio. So real quickly, the agenda for this evening, you've heard the introductions. We'll give a brief project overview for any of those of you who haven't joined us before. We'll discuss the results of our needs and deficiencies analysis. We'll present our preliminary purpose and need for the study. And we'll talk about the universe of alternatives. And then finally, reminder of the next steps in the study. So now a brief overview of the project. Pictured here is the location map showing the study area. So the I-95 main line, the limits of our study on I-95 start down at exit 7 and stretch to exit 9. We have also extended the traffic analysis down to exit 6 on 95 because there's a separate project that's going on down there. So we want to make sure that all of our traffic models reflect the impacts of that. So we're looking at the ramps, the main lines, We're also looking at the local city streets, such as Route 1, also known as Tresser Boulevard, to understand some of the major diversion patterns as well. And I don't want to forget Bridge 32, which you see here, somewhat to the right of the screen. That's really the impetus for this project, looking at ways that as we go into the future, that bridge will need to be rehabilitated or replaced. So the goals of our study, we're looking at the existing conditions in the corridor, traffic, safety, things like that, environmental resources, and also some of the as we call them, built conditions out there, historic resources and the like. And then also what are the challenges and constraints that we're facing. Another goal is to establish a draft preliminary purpose and need, and we'll talk about why that's important a little bit later. We're going to develop project alternatives, and really, as we look to the end of this study, that is going to recommend a small number of reasonable alternatives that are going to go into the more rigorous, as we call it, NEPA, or the National Environmental Policy Act. So this won't be, we won't be finishing this study and just moving on to construction, but there will be some more detailed review that has to happen from there. So roughly the study schedule, as you can see, we're more or less halfway through. We're currently developing alternatives, and we'll be evaluating those and screening those in the future. And as you can see, the little tags for public meetings are going to happen as we complete those milestones, and then as we start preparing the results of the PEL report, as we will call it, and the recommendations resulting from it. So now I'll turn it over to Andy for the needs and deficiencies.
All right, thanks, John. So as John mentioned, we recently concluded our needs and deficiencies analysis of the infrastructure within the study area. And here we're looking at the bridges, the I-95 main line and ramps, and also the local roads. So first, I'm going to touch on the deficiencies noted with the bridges. But actually, before we start with that, we're going to go over some vocabulary with some of the bridge components that I'm going to be mentioning later on. So the first is the bridge deck. This is typically the concrete portion of the bridge that your car drives upon as you drive over the bridge. This deck is supported by the superstructure, which here in Connecticut is typically steel beams or concrete beams. And the superstructure transfers the loads from the deck to the substructure. And then the substructure carries the loads from the superstructure down into the ground. And again, around here in Connecticut, typically this is comprised of reinforced concrete. And in some instances, you'll see some steel substructures as well. Just in general terms, here in Connecticut, bridges are inspected every 2 years, sometimes more frequently depending on their condition. During this inspection, the various components, so the ones that I just mentioned, are given a rating from 0 to 9. The rating scale you can see on the right of the screen here ranges from 0 to 9, 0 being the worst and 9 being the best. The state typically endeavors to keep the bridges in a state of good repair, or SOGR, you can see there in the scale. And that means the bridges have a rating of 5 or better, a rating of fair or better. So we have 12 bridges in our study area, and the bridges within the study area are rated from satisfactory, a 6, to fair, a 5. It's important to note that the bridges within the study area are safe to drive on. However, the state recognizes that regular maintenance is required, and at times major upgrades are required in order to keep these bridges in a state of good repair long into the future. So 2 of the bridges within the study area were identified as having some deficiencies. Now, the first one that we want to mention here is Bridge 32, and John mentioned this was the impetus for the project. This bridge was built in the 1950s, and it has undergone a number of rehabilitation projects. And if you live in the area, you probably were aware that they were working on the bridge the last couple of years. a fairly substantial repair project in order to basically extend the serviceable life of this bridge by about 10 years. Now, it's important to note this bridge is in fair condition. So the results of this project brought the bridge up to a fair condition, a 5 for the deck, substructure, and superstructure. However, the bridge is still functionally deficient with the narrow curb-to-curb width. And again, the work done on it is really only going to get the bridge another 10 or so years before additional work is needed on this structure. The other bridge with the noted deficiency is Bridge 36. This is Blatchley Road over I-95. And this bridge is structurally okay. However, it's noted that the bridge has a narrow roadway width, being that the curb-to-curb width, given the number of lanes on the road, is too narrow given current design standards. So we flagged that one as being a deficiency. Now I'll turn it over to Emily, who's going to talk about some of the roadway deficiencies on the mainline 95 and then also on the local roads. Emily?
Thank you, Andy. As Eddie just mentioned, I will now review some of the deficiencies of the main line. We'll start with physical deficiencies, so how the roadway was built. Those are called geometric deficiencies. There are some instances of tight highway curvature, so that is a curve that creates a short sight distance. So you can see the photo on the right. That's the point of view of the driver, and you can see that the sight distance is short. So that creates a shorter reaction time, and therefore causing drivers to slow down and then creating a backup behind them. Another geometric deficiency throughout the corridor is narrow shoulders, and that's inside shoulders and outside shoulders. You can see them highlighted here in orange on the map. Typically, a shoulder wants to be, or you want to design a shoulder so that it is as wide as a travel lane, or approximately as wide as a travel lane. So if a car runs out of gas or they blow a tire, they can pull off the main line and into this, we call it breakdown lane, so they can get out of the way of other vehicles. They don't block traffic. But in this case, there is no room for that recovery. So vehicles, broken down vehicles, stop in the travel lane, thus impeding traffic, creating more congestion, and creating somewhat of a safety issue, stopping in the travel lane. Some other deficiencies on the main line revolve around short or missing entry and exit lanes. So I'll describe what that means. If you're on an on-ramp and you want to enter onto a main line, this applies to any highway. You enter the ramp going about, 25 miles an hour, and then you have to get up to speed of the highway, say that's 65 or 55 miles an hour. So you need time to get up to speed with the other vehicles so that when you merge in with the main line, you're all going the same speed. It's an easy maneuver. Same goes for exiting. When you exit off the highway, the ramp speed is slower than the main line. So you need time to decelerate or slow your speed. And that's often done in the exit lane. But in some cases along this corridor, the space to slow down or speed up is too short. So vehicles then have to slow down or speed up on the main line, which causes, again, vehicles behind them to have to brake. And you can see an example of this on the next slide. This is northbound approaching exit 9. The Seaside Avenue off-ramp. You can see there's very little space here to slow down before approaching the exit. So vehicles will likely slow down along the main line, causing vehicles behind them to slow down as well. So we talked about those were physical deficiencies. Now we'll talk about operational. So speeds and travel time. This is a map you can see on the right. These from exit 6 to 9, that's the 3.2 mile section in the study area. When there's no congestion, it takes about 4 minutes to drive that 3.2 miles, and that equates to about 68 miles per hour on average. When there is congestion, speeds can get as low as 12 miles per hour, and that's in the southbound morning peak hour. That takes 16 minutes to drive those same 3.2 miles, and that equates to about 12 minutes of congestion. In the nighttime, in the evening rush in the northbound, the congestion is about 10 minutes, and that equates to 6 minutes of congestion. The next slide you may recall from the last meeting, what we do with the existing traffic conditions, we put it into a traffic model, and the result ranks the highway and segments of the highway into a level of service. We call it an LOS. So if the rank LOS is A or B, there are no delays, and that is the best scenario. If the classification is level of service C or D, there are some minimal delays. It's still acceptable. Where we start to see failing or deficient is when there are significant delays, and that's equivalent to level of service E or F. So on the next slide are the results of those traffic models, and this is the southbound morning peak. You can see a lot of red. So level of service E or F for most of the study area. And we pointed out some of the reasons for these deficiencies in the congestion, and that being high volume weave area between ramps. I'll describe what that means in a moment. Closely spaced on-ramps, as well as downstream congestion, which limits the number of vehicles that are able to get through the study area. So you'll remember from a few moments ago, I described the exiting vehicles and entering vehicles. They need space to speed up or slow down. In some instances, that space is the same for entering and exiting vehicles. So you can imagine the blue vehicles slowing down, the pink vehicles speeding up, and them having to merge together. That can create congestion. So we'll kind of describe in an example here. This is traveling southbound between exits 9 and 8. So this is entering from exit 9, that's route 1, and exiting off to exit 8. There are 700 vehicles that get on from entrance 9, as well as 1,500 vehicles that get off. So think about all those vehicles that have to merge together, some slowing down, some speeding up, making space for each other, and that is going to create even further congestion on the main line as the vehicles behind them wait as the vehicles in front slow down and merge together. Another cause for those failing level of service on the main line would be closely spaced on-ramps. So similar to what I just described, anytime a vehicle is entering the highway, the vehicles on the main line must either slow down or move over, merge with other vehicles to allow that oncoming traffic onto the main line. When you put two very high volume ramps in close succession, these are only 900 feet apart, that just exacerbates the problem, causing further congestion. Very similar reasons for congestion in the northbound direction. There are pockets of acceptable level of service, but there of course are pockets of failing. You see the red and the yellow mixed throughout. Same reasons in the northbound direction. So there's high volume between ramps, a lot of vehicles having to merge and weave between each other, closely spaced on ramps, and downstream congestion, which again limits the number of vehicles that can even get through the study area. We also took a look at the crashes. This is a 5-year study period. Note the time frame of this. This is 2016 to 2021. So this won't include any recent crashes or fatalities that you may have seen. However, we are monitoring and tracking that. And throughout the study, as the study progresses, we will be updating the crash analysis to include more up-to-date data. So what you see on the right is called a hotspot map. We're on slide 34. Yes, thank you. Hotspot map. So the darker the red, meaning the more crashes there are at that location. And you'll see there are clusters around curves or when there is an off-ramp or an on-ramp. Most of the crashes along the main line are rear end or overtaking meaning merging. So that fits in line with the people having to merge and allow other vehicles to get on when there are a high number of on-ramps and off-ramps. And there were 4 fatalities along the main line in our study area within the 5-year study period. Okay, we've talked about the main line. We'll now get into some of the deficiencies along the local roadway. First, we'll talk about the approach. What's the scope of this PEL study for the local roadways? So we first reviewed the multimodal conditions along the local roadways, and that's looking at transit service, ped and bike facilities, and the conditions of each of those. So we reviewed the needs and deficiencies in the existing conditions. We will then, as the study progresses, identify potential improvements to those transit access, pedestrian connectivity, bicycle connectivity, and safety. We'll then evaluate some of the impacts of those improvements and then evaluate how that might change the travel demand and how many users use each of those components. So that's just the scope of the project. Now we'll go into the existing conditions analysis and the needs and deficiencies. Again, same 5-year study period, so no recent crashes are in this data set. However, this will be updated. There were 4 fatalities along the local roads, and you'll notice the 3 in succession there on Tresser Boulevard. So there's very much a hot spot on Tresser for ped and bike crashes. And similar to the main line, the most predominant crash type along the local roads are rear end. And we understand that pedestrian and bicycle safety is a big issue and a big concern in Stamford. We heard it from folks on the call. We heard it from the agencies and local knowledge as well. So we wanted to pull that out and kind of highlight where the issues are, what we're seeing. And 34 of the 50 studied intersections within the study area have 1 or more pedestrian or bicycle crash. So what you see on the screen are intersections that have 3 or more ped or bike crashes. And you'll note the previous slide, there were 4 fatality crashes on the local roads. 3 of those included a pedestrian or a bicycle or a bicyclist. Moving on, so some kind of high-level review of what we're seeing in terms of pedestrian and bicycle facilities and deficiencies on the local roads. So we have limited connectivity, and that's mainly north-south underneath the overpass under I-95. There are limited bike facilities, and that's mostly from the east-west direction on the north side of I-95. There are long pedestrian crossings. There's a lack of ADA-compliant sidewalk and crossing features. Limited lighting under the bridges, and that's under the underpasses, and limited transit amenities. So we'll show some examples of those concepts. And this is on Elm Street under I-95. And even during the day, it is quite dark out here. So we understand that there's limited lighting under the underpass. And it's just generally uncomfortable for pedestrian and bicyclists. The sidewalk on the left-hand side of the screen is narrow. There's no physical barrier between pedestrians and vehicles. Similarly, there's no physical barrier between bicyclists and vehicles on the right side of the screen. You'll see the shared bike lane is against the wall within the travel lane. And we can take a look at, so Tresser Boulevard, as I mentioned before, those are those very long crossing distances. There are quite a number of lanes on Tresser Boulevard. So of course there are going to be long crossing distances. And often you'd like to see a pedestrian refuge, which is kind of a physical barrier between a pedestrian and a vehicle, so that if a pedestrian can't cross the full length of the crosswalk in time, they can seek refuge in that physical median in the center. So there are some deficiencies where that physical barrier does not exist in the study area. So we've gone through needs and deficiencies. The next step in this process is to review the draft preliminary purpose and need, starting with what is a purpose and need. It is a statement that defines a transportation problem. It identifies needs in the study area, so everything we just talked about. And it also guides the alternatives analysis process. So it must be clear, well justified, and specific. What goes into a purpose and need? So the transportation deficiencies, everything we just discussed, the goals and objectives of the study, that's what John talked about in the beginning. And of course, public and agency input throughout the entirety of the study. And there are 2 components to the purpose and need. We have the primary purpose, and that's what really drives the project. It's the big why. Why is the project justified? We also have other desirable outcomes of the project, and those can be considered secondary purpose and need components. Those are additional goals that are desirable, but they aren't really the core purpose of the project. However, they could be considered as a factor when selecting different alternatives throughout the study. So we'll start with the primary purpose and need of the project. 2 bullets. Number 1, improve the mobility along that 3.2 mile section of the I-95 corridor between exit 7 and 9. Second being improve the crossing of I-95 over Metro North Railroad and Myrtle Avenue such that the crossing is in a state of good repair. So what Andy talked about previously, this is really relating to Bridge 32, and that again was the impetus of this PEL study. Now I'll go into other desirable outcomes of the project. These are more related to the local roadways, and you'll see picture on the right, that's right near the STC. So number 1, increase mobility for all users. That's PED, bike, transit users underneath I-95 and along the local adjacent roadways. Second being, and this was added due to input from the public, so thank you, to enhance cross-connection of communities adjacent to I-95. So that's really in relation to the north-south connectivity between and under the underpasses, under the overpasses rather. Third bullet, improve transportation facilities to provide more opportunities to use these facilities, and of course, ease of use as well for the local communities, including traditionally underserved communities. And the last point being to reduce the impact to local and regional community by minimizing disruption during construction. So we reviewed the goals of the study, the needs and deficiencies of the main line, of the local road, of the bridges. We just went through the primary purpose and need of the study. And the next step is to develop project alternatives, which starts with creating a universe of alternatives that Najma will talk about now.
Thanks, Emily. So as Emily mentioned, one of the initial steps in the process of developing our alternative is to set up a universe of alternatives. Think of this as a brainstorming realm where we toss in various transportation improvement concepts and ideas. And this serves as a toolbox for us so we can look at different options and evaluate them and identify solutions that are more feasible and workable for our study area. And then ultimately that would help us to determine our final recommendations for this project. So we started by assembling a matrix. As you can see on this slide, this creates our universe of alternative, which includes 5 major transportation improvement categories. And each category includes different options that relate to each of those. No build, transportation demand management, transportation system management, mass transit, and improve existing corridors. And several of the options that are included in our initial list of universal alternative may not satisfy our purpose and need for this project, but could still be considered as some complementary feature that are valuable and improve overall transportation mobility and safety. So in the next few slides, we're just going to look at each category and look at some of the examples of how they could look like in practice. So first category was no build. This is pretty straightforward. The project does not advance, and we will continue with the ongoing maintenance. The second category is transportation demand management. This approach is about reducing overall travel demand within our transportation network. And it's not just improving infrastructure for motor vehicles, but we are also trying to provide strategies that offer more sustainable travel options and encourage other modes of transportation to use the infrastructure. From providing park and ride facilities, alternate mode sharing, van pool, providing HOV lanes and express lanes. These are all the options that can be considered to reduce overall travel demand of the network. Next category is transportation system management, or TSM. TSM represents strategies that are trying to use technology and data to optimize our transportation network and make the best of what we have, rather than expanding on our roadway or building new infrastructure. One example of that is ramp metering, as you can see on this slide. This involves installing a signal on a freeway on-ramp, and that controls the rate of the traffic that can enter to the main line. And that's based on the real-time traffic condition of the main line and helps us make dynamic decisions. So this is one way of improving our traffic conditions that can help to alleviate some of the congestion and also improve safety. Other examples of that are variable speed limits, traffic signal optimization, and traffic control. Moving to the next category, which is mass transit. Under this category, we look at approaches that we can enhance transit infrastructure. And we consider options to improve the efficiency of public transportation, which can contribute to a more sustainable and accessible transportation network. We look at options related to transit investment. Some of those can be on a very large scale, such as introducing or expanding on bus, streetcar, or rail services. Or on a more localized scale, we can look at improving bus stops or introducing an exclusive bus lanes. And with all those options, we are trying to look at ways and methods to improve overall experience for transit users and encourage other users to choose public transportations. And our final category is in our universe is improve existing corridors that can be related to both I-95 mainline and local roadways. First, let's look at the mainline. So as we mentioned, a key driver of this project is to improve the efficiencies of Bridge 32. As we look at different options and solutions to accommodate that, we are also looking to see how we can combine that with other transportation improvement concepts to improve the mobility of the I-95 corridor. And this can be achieved through different ways, such as modifying the existing configuration and bringing some of the deficiencies of the existing mainline, as Emily was talking about, such as short side distance or tight highway curvature, bring those up to standard. We also consider improving interchange configuration and local roadway connection to ramp termini under this category. In the next slides, we can see how they can look like some of these improvements and options. So one option to improve existing corridor on the main line is by providing express lanes that can increase the capacity of the main line by providing a designated lane for longer distance trips. On the left, you can see this can be achieved by an elevated expressway, and on the right, you can see this can also be achieved by at-grade express lane in the middle of the existing alignment of I-95. Another example within this category is construction of a tunnel. As you can see on the right, the tunnel can provide significant space above for the local road that can be used for various purposes, such as pedestrian plaza or green space. But at the same time, you can see on the left, the construction of a tunnel demands significant amount of right-of-way and space. In addition, in our case and project study area, because of the Metro North Railway, it has to go even deeper than it usually is required to go. And then let's look at some of the improvements that we can look under this category for local roadways. One option is improving ramp termini intersections with local roadways and applying enhancement to underpasses to improve community connectivity, such as providing a better accommodation, safer and more comfortable infrastructure for other modes of transportation, such as bicycle, pedestrian, and buses, and also improve lighting that we know is a problem in our study area. Under this category for local roadways, we also seek opportunities for transportation choice and ease of use for local communities to improve the connectivity for our study area and look for all types of travelers. And we pay special attention towards traditionally underserved communities. We also look at options to improve safety, of course, such as providing traffic calming measures. So as we went through these sections, you've seen that we included a wide range of options and concepts to look into for further evaluation. This will be our base and help us develop solutions that could be more feasible for our case and our project study area, and ultimately lead us to develop our final recommendations for this project. And with that, I will hand it over to Marcy, who will talk about our next steps.
All right, thank you. All right, we are almost through. I just have a few slides to close up before we get to our discussion period. I do want to tell you a little bit about our next steps. So what we do now is we'll receive any comments. We'll listen to what you have to say today, or if you want to write them in. In particular, we want to hear about the purpose and need, what your thoughts are on that, as well as the universe of alternatives that were presented tonight. Moving forward, then we want to eliminate those things that aren't feasible and narrow down our choices as we move forward that we continue to consider. After that, we would develop our conceptual solutions and we'll also be seeking public comment on those. Project alternatives and alternative screenings, those get further developed and analyzed in that stage. And then we'll come back and present findings to the public and the agencies in our draft PEL study. Again, there's more opportunity to comment then, and we prepare a final report. So John already mentioned this. The most important thing here is, this is where we are in our schedule. This is our meeting. We will have additional meetings, which I mentioned when we're looking for comments on the alternatives analysis and the PEL study report before we come up with our final recommendations. You can see the most important thing for me, because this is what I do, is this community engagement throughout. There's always an opportunity to participate in our process and weigh in. As far as engagement, we will have another public workshop later in the summer, maybe early fall, where we're going to continue our stakeholder outreach. We have a project advisory committee that we're working closely with, and they are giving us guidance, and they're helping us outreach their individual organizations and communities. We have a very robust website. Please go and take a look. This is where we'll put things like the recording from today's meeting, the presentation, and things like that. Follow us on social media. We have a link to that in a few slides. We do regular e-bulletins. And then finally, anything that you do send us, especially in writing, will go into a comment database that we will maintain moving forward. So I'm not sure if we have any new people, but I want to briefly discuss how we're going to do the discussion, and then I'll turn it back to John, who will lead that. There's two ways that you can provide feedback or ask a question. The first is through raising your hand. And the second is to use the Q&A function. If you want to speak to us verbally, use your raise hand function. We have a phone in participant. It's *9 if you want to raise your hand, and we can call on you. We call on the speakers in the order that you raise your hand. We're trying to be very fair. We want to hear from everyone. Once you are called upon, we'll read your name aloud. We'll ask you to unmute your line. We're hoping that you can state and spell your full name for us so we can jot it down. And then if you can, please limit your comments to 5 minutes. If you want to write your question in, we will also read that aloud so everyone can hear it, especially the phone person who has not probably does not have access to the screen here. If you have a question, type it in the Q&A box, hit submit. and we will read that question aloud and provide an answer to that. All right, with that, I'll turn it to John. But before we go on, I do want to let you know we are going to alternate between the raised hand and the Q&A. So with that, John, I'll turn it to you.
All right. Yeah, anybody with any questions or comments, please feel free to raise your hand, or I see Michael's got a hand raised here. Michael, I think you're muted. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Famous words.
Yeah.
I'm greatly impacted by this because I live on Waverly Place. So when you come off of exit 6, it's Baxter, and then you get to Wilson Street where that bridge goes over the thruway, and then I'm right there, Waverly Place. So the traffic backups, everybody gets off of exit 6 and they fly through Baxter and Waverly when there's any type of traffic on 95. The other thing that is of great concern is we had a few trees that blocked us from 95. Now they are all gone. It was a little bit of a filter for when we have traffic on 95, and the diesel fumes are intense because the trucks are idling. I'm just wondering, is anything going to be done about that? The other idea that I think is brilliant is the tunnel. I know this would probably be a horrible construction project for years, but I have been praying for 95 to be buried through Stamford. And we just don't see it. And it would really improve the connectivity between what's going on in the water side of Stamford and the rest of the city. Those are just my comments, and appreciate this forum.
Great. Yeah, thank you for your comments. I know we are hoping that improving the conditions on the main line will get people off of the local roads. When they, like you said, when they are trying to find cut-throughs to avoid traffic. So I do believe those trees that were cut down were part of that other project that I mentioned. So there's a separate project that's currently in construction to build what we call auxiliary lanes between exit 6 and exit 7. So it's basically just kind of connecting the on and off ramps so that Emily talked about that weaving that goes on where you have cars trying to get on and off the highways, sort of jockeying for position. So that will give folks more room to get on and off the highway there and free up traffic a little bit. So I'm not certain whether they are planning to, if they have a planting plan under that project, but we can look into that and see what they're planning to do.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
One other question is, are we going to get any type of sound barriers?
So I know that was looked at as part of that auxiliary lane project. And as far as what we are looking at in the I-95 Stamford PEL, we're sort of so early on in the process. So we talked about the National Environmental Policy Act that projects go through. So as we perform our study, we'll identify projects that move forward into that NEPA process, and if they qualify to have a noise study, then we'll undertake it then. So we're still a little ways off from that as far as this particular project.
Okay, I'm envious of my neighbors in Greenwich and Darien. Every time I drive past their sound barriers, I say, I wish. So thanks for hearing me out.
No, thank you so much for joining us. Okay, Michael Ferentz.
Yes. Yes. No. So sounds very interesting. I guess there's unrelated things. Just for the rest of the county, I don't know if the idea of a third road, third highway would make sense. I know, like the idea maybe connecting 25 and 7 to Danbury. I don't know how much of that other county traffic relates to the Stamford bottlenecks. I would assume that those aren't, options, at least currently being considered. Because I know, like, they talk about moving stuff to the water to get it off the highways in the tri-state. Like, they've talked about ferries from Bridgeport and Stamford to New York City, which I know isn't really under this purview, but wonder if those things, if they could happen, if they would reduce the volume on the 95. I mean, I notice in Norwalk where they widened it, it helps, but it still gets bottled up there. The recent work they've done there. I don't know if any of that would be relatable to what you're working on in Stamford or not.
Yeah, so as far as kind of the region is concerned, we're really kind of looking at certainly there are aspects of this study that I do just want to point out. We also have and it's Neil, same CTDOT team working on it. Another study, I-95 Greenwich, looking at the New York state line to exit 7. So we do have a little bit of the corridor that we're looking at, and we are communicating between the teams and looking at things holistically, but that's somewhat limited to I-95 and not kind of a broader view. I know,
right.
There, like you said, there have been a number of plans that have been considered. Certainly I-95 from state line to state line, from New York to Rhode Island, has all been kind of looked at a really high level. And so this is sort of zooming in, looking at, again, that Bridge 32 is just, we haven't really delved into it in terms of today's discussion, but the way it was constructed makes it very difficult to handle traffic when we need to do a major rehabilitation or replacement. And so that kind of started this study, and then there's opportunities potentially with some of the close spaced ramps that we're looking at. So
okay,
I hope that helps answer your question.
Yeah.
But
thank you, I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I do see I missed a couple questions in the chat here, so I'll just tackle those now. So I'll read them out loud. First was, hello, was it necessary to take down all those trees on 95? Are they going to replace trees or put up barricades to cut down on noise? Sorry, I missed that. Yeah, so as I mentioned, there is another project in construction that between exit 6 and 7, they did remove some trees. So that was done. I know they did a noise study as part of that project, and the project number is 135 346. The second question from Carol Belizzi. At southbound exit 9, the no turn on red sign results in traffic backing up onto 95 at times. This may have solved some problem in Route 1 in that area, but it's not going well. And some people take license to solve the problem by turning on red. And the lights are short for the number of cars exiting the highway and for those on Route 1. Yeah, that's great feedback. Thank you. So that's definitely something that we're looking at very closely. So for those of you who may not be aware, there was a pedestrian fatality at the intersection, and the city did put up that no turn on red sign at that location to improve safety there. So, you know, best intentions, obviously, in terms of that. So we're looking at ways that interchange can be improved, and whether the signal timings can be improved. So, you know, when you have traffic backing up onto the main line, that's something that we try to avoid. The next question in the Q&A, I'll just keep going there. If anybody wants to chime in by voice, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll call on you. So the next question: the presentation included an image of the Big Dig in Boston that was pretty awful to navigate as a stranger in the area. Further, if you were to choose the tunnel, are there issues with water from the sound? Recalling the World Trade Center built to keep the Hudson River out. Yeah, you know, when we talked about those universal alternatives, that's super high level, there's a lot that would need to be considered with the tunnel. The cost would be incredibly high. And as you rightfully point out, in order to construct it while keeping traffic moving on 95 would be very difficult. So, you know, again, that universe of alternatives is sort of, this is everything that could be considered under the study. And some of these alternatives may require more analysis than others to determine whether they're feasible or not. And, you know, whether the tunnel merits a lot of scrutiny, we're not sure yet, but we are considering everything at this point. Marcy, I don't know, do we have that slide that shows our contact info? We can just kind of leave that up. If anybody has any questions or comments that you think of after the meeting. We do have another public info tomorrow afternoon. I don't expect you'll want to join in on that again, but if not, we have multiple ways you can contact us via our website, i95stanford.com. We've got a call-in hotline number 203-993-6529, various social media handles, and of course you can email me directly as well. So hearing nothing further, I think we'll formally adjourn the meeting at 7:01 here. Thank you again so much for joining us. You know, we could stop the recording maybe in a minute or so, and we can stick around if anybody has any other questions. But again, we got one here. Another comment. The express lanes option reminds me of the New Jersey Turnpike where trucks split from cars. Yeah, again, that's something that something in the realm of possibility, but as you can imagine, the cost and constructability issues are going to be significant with that one. But yeah, the idea, you separate the traffic that's moving through the region, separate that from the traffic that's getting on and off the highway, and that could free up that traffic and get rid of some of that weaving that occurs. I do see another hand up.
Yes, it's me again. One other just idea that I've had on my mind. We have a ton of out-of-state vehicles that pass through our state. I mean, I want to welcome everybody to Connecticut, but it's crazy how many folks come through this state. I was wondering, is it horrible of me to mention that can't we have them pay a little bit of money for coming through our state? It doesn't have to be a big chunk of change, but if we had $1 a car, even 50 cents a car from out of state, not Connecticut folks, but from out of state that passed through and gave us some money, it might help toward funding this wonderful project.
Great. Yeah. So tolling is something that Connecticut DOT doesn't have the ability to do without authorization from the legislature. So currently, I don't believe that's something that they're considering. It has been considered in the past. I do believe, as far as I know, you're not really able to toll folks differently depending on where they're from. However, there are things you can do, like if you have the New Jersey Easy Pass, I think you pay a little bit less on the tolls than if you didn't. So there's things like that, but you'd have to give everybody that opportunity to either be told or purchase the pass to have a lower rate. But so certainly that could be part of the equation, but not something that we have the power to do by ourselves.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Yeah, any more last thoughts? We're happy to stick around. Okay, we got another question in the chat. Great. Would this be daytime construction and land closing? So I-95 in this area, as I probably don't have to tell you, it's very difficult to give the contractor time to work. We don't want to typically have them closing lanes. And again, we're talking pretty far off into the future here because we're still looking at preliminary planning. But just broadly speaking, in construction, working during off-peak hours is the only time that they can close lanes. So that means sometimes at night or in the middle of the day in between. Rush hour kind of starts early here and ends late. So there's not a lot of time for them to work. And I think, if I'm understanding correctly, maybe you mean lane closing. So, but that's, again, talking about that Bridge 32, there may have to be strategies that are employed to build it kind of offline. As we get into future public information meetings, we'll have more of these alternatives to be able to show you and really talk about how that bridge could be constructed. So part of that key is to potentially to find ways to construct offline, allow you to shift the traffic off the existing structure, and then deconstruct and reconstruct the bridge. So I hope that helps answer your question. Got another question in the chat. Parallel bridge like Cuomo Bridge for Tappan Zee Bridge. Yeah, potentially something like that. So that's referring to, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Tappan Zee Bridge. They constructed the new structure in parallel to the old one so that it didn't impact traffic. And we don't have the kind of room like they had building over a large river like that, but that is one way of doing it. Okay, great. Well, thank you all again. Wrapping up again, but we can, like I said, we can hang out for a couple more minutes and answer some questions. So thank you so much for your time.